There is a party going on in a small village. The kind of party that happens maybe once in a generation. Music is pouring out of the house. Lamplight spills through the doorway and into the yard. Inside, people are dancing, and the smell of roasted meat hangs over the whole street. Because the family that owns this house killed the fattened calf tonight. The animal you save for the biggest celebration of your life. And 10 paces from that open door, out in the dark, a man is standing perfectly still. Nobody threw him out. The door is wide open. He has been invited. In fact, he has been begged to come inside. The food on those tables is partly his. The people in that room are his people. All he has to do is walk 10 steps, and he is home. He will not take them. He has been standing there long enough for his feet to go numb, close enough to hear every drumbeat, and something inside him would rather stand in the cold all night than walk through that door. Then the music shifts. A figure appears in the doorway. An old man, the host of the party, the one person who should never leave a celebration like this. He steps out of his own feast, out of the light, and walks into the dark toward the man who refuses to come in. This scene sits at the end of Luke chapter 15, the most famous chapter ever written about lost things. A lost sheep, a lost coin, a lost son, 3 lost things, 3 searches, 3 celebrations. So answer this. Why does a chapter about coming home end with someone still standing outside? Hold that question. We start at the beginning, with the meal that made Jesus tell these stories in the first place. The road is dusty. The sun is high. And somewhere along that road, a crowd has formed around a traveling teacher. But look closer, because this is a strange crowd. It has a seam running down the middle of it, the inner ring. The people pressing in close are the wrong people. Luke names them without blinking. Tax collectors and sinners. In that world, those words carried a smell. A tax collector was a local man who had signed up to squeeze his own neighbors for the Roman Empire, and he usually skimmed extra off the top for himself. He was a trader with a ledger. When he walked through the market, conversations died, and the word sinners covered everyone else who had been quietly written off. The prostitutes, the cheats, the people whose lives had gone publicly and permanently wrong. These were the people you did not greet, did not touch, and absolutely did not eat with. They are standing close to Jesus, closer than they have stood to any religious teacher in their lives. Some of them look like people bracing to be told to leave, because being told to leave is the only thing a holy man has ever said to them. The order to leave never comes, so they stay, and they keep inching in, like cold men around a fire. Now the outer ring, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, are standing at a careful distance, and the distance is the point. Be fair to these men, because the cartoon version of them ruins the story. The Pharisees were not villains twirling their mustaches. They were the serious ones, the men who had given their lives to keeping God's law in a land occupied by pagans. They fasted. They tithed down to the herbs in their gardens. They believed, with real conviction, that holiness required separation, that you protected what was clean by keeping it away from what was not. A man was known by his table. Share bread with someone, and you were telling the whole village, this person is acceptable to me, which is why what they are watching feels, to them, like a scandal in broad daylight. Because Jesus is not just teaching these people. He is eating with them, reclining at the same table, dipping bread in the same bowl, laughing at the same jokes. A rabbi with a reputation. A man, some are calling a prophet, treating the town's write-offs like invited guests. So the outer ring starts to murmur. Luke records the exact sentence, and you should hear it the way it was meant to be heard, muttered at a volume calibrated to carry. This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. That sentence is not small talk. It is a charge, an accusation dressed up as an observation, and everyone on that road understands it. They are saying a man is known by his table. And look at his table. Jesus hears it. Of course he hears it. It was engineered to be heard. He does not defend himself. He does not quote a regulation back at them or start an argument about purity codes. He does something far more dangerous than an argument. He tells them a story, then a second one, then a third. And the third one runs nearly 5 times longer than the first 2 combined, as if the first 2 stories were steps, and the whole staircase was built to reach the third. Before the first story starts, you need to know what a story could do in that world. The people standing on that road did not treat stories as decoration, something for children at bedtime. They knew that a story aimed at the right listener was a delivery system, a way to slip past a man's defenses and set the truth down inside him before he thought to lock the door. Their own scriptures carried the most famous case. King David had taken another man's wife and then arranged that man's death. And for months, he had managed the whole thing, buried it under royal business, told himself whatever kings tell themselves. Then, the prophet Nathan showed up, and Nathan did not open with the evidence. He told the king a story about a rich man who owned huge flocks, and a poor man who owned one little lamb, a lamb that ate from his plate and slept in his arms like a daughter. And when a traveler came to visit, the rich man spared his own flocks and took the poor man's lamb and served it for dinner. David came out of his chair in a fury. He said the man who did this deserves to die. And Nathan looked at the king and said 4 words. You are the man. The trap was never the story. The trap was the moment you realized which character was wearing your face. That is the kind of weapon Jesus reaches for on that dusty road. The Pharisees think they are about to be an audience. They are about to be participants. And notice something about the answer he chooses, because it tells you what he thought the real problem was. They accused him of eating with the wrong people. He could have answered with a lecture about who qualifies as clean. Instead, all 3 of his stories are about the same 2 things. Something valuable goes missing, and someone refuses to accept the loss. 3 stories. 1 shape, rising as they go. Each one ends in the same place, with the searcher standing in front of friends and neighbors, saying the same words. And I want you to count those words every time they appear, because by the end of this journey, that count is going to matter more than it looks. Rejoice with me. That is the phrase. Remember it. A man is going to say it about an animal. A woman is going to say it about a coin. And a father is going to say something even stronger about a son. To a listener who cannot get the words out of his own mouth. 3 lost things. Keep count of those 2. The number sounds simple, and it is right there in the title of this video. And by the time we reach that dark yard from the opening scene, you will see why the counting was never simple at all. The first story begins in open country, in the heat and the rock, and Jesus starts it with a move so quiet that most readers slide right past it. He looks at scholars and lawyers, men of clean hands and long study, and he asks them to imagine being a shepherd. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep. Sit with how strange that opening is. Coming from him, aimed at them. Shepherding was hard, dirty, low work. You lived outdoors with animals. You smelled like them. You could not keep the washings and the rhythms that respectable religion required. In later rabbinic tradition, shepherds were sometimes treated with open suspicion. Men whose testimony a court could wave away. Whatever each listener on that road privately thought of shepherds, no scribe had ever mistaken one for a colleague. And Jesus looks at scholars and lawyers and says, Suppose one of you has 100 sheep. He hands them the staff. He puts them in the smelly cloak, out in the hills, and dares them to follow the story from inside it. Every man on that road walks in. That is the trap Nathan taught us to watch for. Already closing. One sentence in. Now the scene itself. And Jesus sets it exactly where a flock would be. Open country. Not a farmyard. Not a village pen. Grazing land. Wide and rocky. The kind of ground where 100 animals spread out across a slope and drift along the grass through the day while the light slides toward evening. At some point, every shepherd counts. It is the oldest habit of the trade. Steady as breathing, he moves through the flock with his staff, touching backs, and his lips move without sound because he has done this so many thousands of times that the count runs by itself. 40, 50, 60. He knows some of them by their gait. The limper, the greedy one, the old ewe who always turns up near the end. 97, 98, 99. The staff stays up. The count is short. He runs it again, because the first response to a wrong number is always to blame the count. He works back through the flock, scanning backs and flanks, looking for the one tucked behind the others. 99. The number holds, and somewhere out in those hills, past what his eyes can reach, one animal of his is standing alone and does not know where the flock went. Here is the question worth asking. The one the story quietly plants. How does a sheep get lost? Because there was no moment of decision. No sheep in history ever stood at the edge of the flock and thought, "I am done with this arrangement," and walked off in rebellion. What actually happens is smaller and worse. A sheep lowers its head to a patch of grass. It eats. A few feet away there is another patch, slightly greener. So it steps and eats again. Then another patch, another step. Head down the entire time. And every single step is harmless. Every one. Right up until the animal lifts its head, and the hills have gone unfamiliar, and the sound of the flock is gone. It never chose to leave. It just followed 10,000 small mouthfuls away from home. One bite at a time. Somewhere out there tonight is a man in his 40s who has realized he cannot remember the last time he really prayed. And what unsettles him is that he cannot find the day he stopped. There was no day. There was no fight with God. No crisis. No door slamming shut. There was a busy season at work. And a move. And kids. And a slow drift of Sundays. 10,000 small mouthfuls. And none of them felt like leaving. Back on the hillside, the shepherd stands with the wrong number in his hands. And the arithmetic in front of him is brutal. 99 sheep here. In open country. With the light failing. One sheep somewhere out there. In country that has wolves in it. In country that has cliffs. Whatever he does next costs him something. And the one is gone for good. Go. And he walks away from 99 animals standing in the open. His whole living. His whole flock. Left on a darkening hillside while he chases one stray through the rocks. Any manager alive would tell him the math. You do not risk 99 to chase one. You write the one off. The way you write off a torn cloak or a cracked jar. 1%. The cost of doing business in rough country. And then he does something no accountant on earth would sign off on. He leaves the 99 in the open country, and he goes after the one. Feel the weight of that decision. Because Jesus' listeners felt it. There is no fence in this story. No walled pen. No hired man mentioned anywhere. The whole flock stands on a darkening hillside, and the shepherd turns his back on all of it. His entire living, breathing wealth, and walks into the rocks after a single stray. Every sensible voice says stay. The shepherd is not listening. because the shepherd does not run his flock like a ledger. The lost one is not a percentage to him. It is the limper, or the greedy one, or the old you. It has a face, so he goes. And now the story slows down. And you should let it. Night country in Judea is nothing like a painting. The heat leaves fast, and the rock keeps its edges. He moves along slopes, where a wrong step means a broken ankle, in a place where a broken ankle can mean everything. He checks the wadis. The dry stream cuts, where a sheep slides in and cannot climb out. He pushes through thorn scrub. Every so often, he stops and calls, then holds absolutely still with his head turned, straining for a bleat, and gets wind, and silence, and his own heart. There is a word in the text that tells you how this search ends before it ends. Jesus says the shepherd goes after the lost sheep until he finds it. Until. That one word is doing more work than any other word in the story. Until means the search has no other exit. He does not look while the light holds. He does not look until it gets dangerous, or until a reasonable effort has been made and honor is satisfied. There is one condition that ends this search, and it is the finding, which means when he walked away from the flock, he had already decided the ending, and the hills could take all night arguing with him for all it mattered. That word is the first real answer to the question this whole journey is asking. The question in the title: how far will he go? Farther than the math says. Past sundown. Past reasonable. Past the point where anyone would have blamed him for turning around. The cost here is effort and risk with no ceiling on it. Hold that. The price is going up as we climb. And then, somewhere in the dark, it happens. A sound. Thin and pathetic and unmistakable. He scrambles toward it. And there it is. Wedged in some crease of rock or tangled in scrub. Exhausted. Wild-eyed. Too far gone to do anything but tremble. What he does next is the tenderest detail in the story and the easiest to miss. He does not drive the animal home. No shoving it along in front of him. No switch across its haunches. No lecture delivered to livestock in the dark. A lost sheep is a spent sheep. It has nothing left. So the shepherd crouches down, gets his shoulders under it, and stands up wearing it. A full-grown animal draped across the back of his neck like a yoke he chose. The text even gives us his mood while he does it. And the mood is the shock. He lifts it onto his shoulders. Joyfully, every step of that walk home. The sheep contributes nothing. It hangs there, all dead weight in wool, being carried by legs that are not its own. That is the whole arrangement. The one who wandered gets carried. The one who never stops searching does the sweating. By the time he reaches the village, it is deep night. And here is where the story tips from touching into slightly crazy. He does not settle the flock, bar his door, and collapse onto his mat. He starts banging on doors. He wakes his friends. He calls his neighbors out of their houses. And the reason he gives them, at that hour, is this: rejoice with me. I have found my sheep that was lost. There is the phrase I told you to count. Say it with me. That is one. Neighbors dragged from sleep to celebrate a rescued farm animal. And Jesus, watching the faces of the clean-robed men at the edge of the crowd, drives the story home with one sentence about heaven. That there is more joy up there over one sinner who comes home than over 99 respectable people who never left. The tax collectors in the inner ring must have felt that sentence land in their chests. Somebody counts them. Somebody would come, looking, one lost thing, found and carried home. That is the first. But before the murmuring men can even finish deciding what they think of shepherds, Jesus is already talking again. And the second story is nothing like the first. The sky closes into a roof. The open hills shrink to a single dark room. And this time the lost thing has no legs to wander off with. and no voice to cry out when the searcher gets close. The sheep, at least, could bleat. The next lost thing goes missing in total silence. The second story starts with a woman, and with a number small enough to hurt. Suppose a woman has 10 silver coins, and loses one. Step inside her house first, because the house is half the story. A poor family's home in a village of that time and place was usually one room, packed earth floor, stone walls, a doorway, and maybe a slit of a window set high. Less for light than for air. Even at noon, the corners of that room stayed dusky. The floor was not smooth like a modern room either. It was dirt, uneven, with cracks and low spots, and rushes or straw scattered across it. A dropped ring, a dropped bead, a dropped coin could vanish in that room, the way a stone vanishes in a pond. Now the coin. A drachma was a silver coin, worth roughly a day of a laborer's work. Do not bother converting that into modern money, because the numbers never translate. Measure it the way she measured it. She has 10 days of work, or 10 days of bread, sitting in her keeping. And for a family at that level, there is no cushion behind those coins. No account somewhere else. No drawer of spares. Some scholars have suggested that 10 coins may have been something even more personal. A set of silver kept from her wedding. Though the text does not say, and we should not build on it. What the text does say is enough. She had 10. Now her hand comes up from the jar, or the fold of cloth, or wherever she kept them, and she counts 9, 1/10 of everything. Gone. And gone somewhere inside her own 4 walls. Now put this story next to the first one and feel how different the losing is. Because Jesus is up to something with the difference. The sheep lost itself. It had legs and appetite, and it nibbled its own way over the horizon, one mouthful at a time. You can hold a sheep at least slightly responsible for being a sheep. The coin did nothing. A coin has no legs and no appetite. It did not wander, did not rebel, did not choose a single thing. It was dropped. It slipped through a crack in somebody's grip, and the somebody may well have been the very hand that was supposed to keep it safe. Then it rolled, the way coins roll, in some direction nobody saw, and settled in the dark, and dust began to settle on top of it, and a coin cannot cry out. That is the detail that separates this story from the last one and gives it its particular ache. Out on the hillside, the search had sound to work with. The shepherd could call, and stop, and listen for that thin bleat riding the wind. In this room there is nothing to listen for. The coin does not know it is lost. It is not lying under the dust, feeling sorry, or hoping, or waiting. It is just gone, silent, its silver face pressed into the dirt, unable to contribute one thing to its own rescue. But notice what the coin did not lose. Value. A drachma under 3 years of dust is worth exactly what a drachma is worth. The silver does not care whether anyone can see it. Lost and worthless are 2 different words, and this whole story leans on the space between them. Somewhere out there is a woman who grew up in church, 3rd pew, every Sunday of her childhood. Then her marriage came apart, and the congregation she had known her whole life went quiet around her, and the quiet told her what they thought. She did not storm out. There was no angry letter, no declaration. She just stopped being anywhere, and as far as she could tell, nobody noticed the floor had 1 less coin on it. Ask her today and she will not say she left the faith. She will say something worse. She will say she fell, and nobody heard her land. There are people like that everywhere, and this story exists for them. They are not runaways. They are not rebels. They were dropped. sometimes by the very hands that should have held them. And they have been lying in some dark corner for years, quietly certain that the household stopped counting long ago. The story says the household never stopped counting, because back in that one-room house, the woman is standing very still, with 9 coins in her palm, and her eyes are already moving across the floor, corner to corner, crack to crack. She is not wringing her hands. She is planning. The first thing she does is light a lamp in the middle of the day. Small detail. Real cost. Lamp oil was bought with money, and a woman down to 9 coins does not burn oil at noon for comfort. She burns it because the thing she is hunting lives in the dark parts of the room, and she has decided the dark parts are coming out of hiding today. That little clay lamp, flame the size of a thumbnail, is the first announcement of how this search is going to run. She is spending to find. The search has a budget now, and the budget is whatever it takes. Then she picks up the broom, and you need to forget every tidy picture that word puts in your head. This is not housekeeping. She starts at one wall and works the floor in strips, bent low, the lamp in one hand, throwing its small circle of light ahead of the broom. She drags the water jars away from their places and sweeps where they stood. She pulls up the sleeping mats and shakes them and sweeps underneath. The stool gets turned over. The straw gets raked into piles and picked through with fingers. Dust climbs into the light and hangs there. And the neat single room stops being neat. Because she is not cleaning this house. She is excavating it. And every few strokes, she stops. Dead still. Head tilted. Because a broom cannot see a coin. But it can hear one. Somewhere under all that dust is one small piece of silver. And the moment the straw catches its edge, it will do the only thing a coin can do. It will scrape, or shift, or roll. One thin metallic whisper against packed dirt. So she works in short strokes and listens in the gaps. Sweep and listen. Sweep and listen. A rhythm with a held breath inside it. Stand back from the scene and look at what it took. The room had to be disturbed. Everything in its place. And the coin stays lost forever. The jars had to move. The mats had to come up. The dust had to fly. There is a rough truth sitting in that picture, and it does not need me to decorate it. Hidden things do not surface in an undisturbed room. Finding costs order. Every real search leaves the house looking like something happened here. Because something did. She could have stopped. You know, 9/10 is a passing grade almost anywhere. 9 coins still feed the family this week. At some point, a reasonable neighbor would have told her. It will turn up on its own. These things do. But this story runs on the same stubborn word the hillside ran on. She sweeps until. The lamp does not go out at a decent hour. The broom does not go back in its corner because her arms are tired. There is one ending available, and she has already chosen it. And if it takes standing every object in this house on its head, then that is what the day is for. And then, in one of those passes, the light catches something, down at the base of a wall, or under the lip of a jar she has dragged aside. A point of brightness answers the flame. She is on her knees before she decides to be. Fingers into the dust. And there it is. That small familiar weight. Silver with its face dirty. Worth this morning exactly what it was worth the day she got it. She closes her hand around it and stands there in her wrecked and glorious room. One woman. Tinquine. Whole. You know what she does next. Because you watched the shepherd do it. She goes out the door and calls her friends and her neighbors together. And a village woman's neighbors were her whole world. And she says the words to them. Rejoice with me. I have found the coin I lost. That is too. Same words. Second mouth. The count is running, and Jesus adds the same ending as before. that the angels of God throw that kind of celebration over one sinner who turns around. Notice, quietly, whose face is playing God in this story. A woman, on her knees, in the dust, with a broom. The clean-robed men at the edge of the crowd had spent their lives arguing about what God is like, and not one of their arguments looked like her. He gave them a shepherd, and now a housewife, and the murmuring ring has to stand there and take it. 2 stories down, 2 lost things found. Run the arithmetic they have been listening to. 1 sheep out of 100, 1%. And a man crossed night country for it. 1 coin out of 10, a full tenth. And a woman took her house apart for it. The stakes have multiplied by 10 between stories. And if the listeners caught the pattern, a few of them must have wondered where it was headed next. Here is where it went. Jesus takes a breath, and the 3rd story opens with a number that ends the mathematics for good. A certain man, he says, had 2 sons. 1 loss in 100 was the first story. 1 in 10 was the second. This is one of 2. Half of everything a father has. And this time, the lost thing has legs, and a voice, and a will of its own. And no shepherd alive can sling a son across his shoulders and carry him home against it. The sheep was lost by instinct. The coin was lost by gravity. What happens next is lost on purpose. A certain man had 2 sons. Before anything breaks, stand on the land for a minute, because you need to feel the weight of what is about to be torn. This is not a house with a savings account. This is an estate, the kind of holding a family built across generations. And everything on it took years to make. Olive trees that the grandfather planted, because an olive tree gives you nothing worth pressing for the first decade of its life. Terrace slopes, where somebody's hands moved every one of those stones. A vineyard, some barley ground, a courtyard, animals, servants who have worked this soil so long, they are nearly family themselves. Land like this was more than wealth. It was the family's name made visible, the proof of every ancestor's labor, the thing you held in trust for sons who would hold it for theirs. The man has 2 of those sons. The older one is out in those fields most days. The younger one is about to speak, and what he says, likely on some ordinary afternoon with the household moving around them, is this: Father, give me my share of the estate. Feel how wrong that sentence is in its own world. Inheritance was normally bound up with a father's death. That is the natural architecture of it. The son receives because the father is gone. Under the customs of the time, an older brother took a double portion. So, in a family with 2 sons, the younger stood to receive about 1/3 of everything. Someday, at a graveside, what the boy is asking for is someday. Now, he wants the graveside math without the grave. To many of the people hearing Jesus tell this story, that request would have sounded like something far colder than a financial proposal. It would have sounded like a son looking at a living father and asking for the one thing his death would provide. Whatever tone the boy used. However, he dressed it up. The message underneath had a shape everyone on that road could see. Our relationship is worth less to me than your property. I want out, and I want to be paid on the way. A village father in that world held real authority. And everyone listening knew the script for this moment. Rage, refusal, maybe a public shaming sharp enough that the boy never raised the subject again. Some fathers would have struck him. Nobody would have blinked. Now read what the father actually does. In the flattest, quietest line in the story. So he divided his property between them. No thunder, no speech, no bargaining, no conditions, no cooling off period. The son asks for the unaskable, and the father says yes. And do not rush past one small word in that line, because it is carrying freight we will need later. He divided the property between them. Them, 2 sons. 1 division. The day the younger boy got his share, the older boy's share was settled too. The fields he worked, the flocks he counted, the whole remaining estate. From that afternoon forward, all of it stood assigned to him. File that away. It looks like a legal footnote right now. It is not, but sit with the father's yes. Because the yes is the scandal of this chapter. He had the power to refuse. He had every custom in the country on his side. He could have kept his boy home with a single word. And he did not say it. And you have to ask why. Here is the terrible logic of it. A son kept by force is not a son. He is a prisoner who eats at your table. The father could chain the boy's body to the farm and lose him completely, or open his hand and lose him this way, the way that leaves a road home. Real love holds the door open even when everything on the other side of the door is ruin. Because a heart cannot be compelled back. It can only come back. So the father signs, so to speak. He carves up the work of generations because his younger son asked him to. And the household staff must have gone about their chores that week in stunned silence. It takes a few days to turn a share of an estate into something a man can carry. Luke says the younger son gathered all he had and left. And to travel light and far. He would likely have had to turn much of what he owned into silver. Fields and trees and animals converted into coins you could count into a bag, which means buyers. And buyers mean neighbors. And neighbors mean the village knew. A boy selling off his family's holdings. Selling fast. The way you sell when you are already gone in your mind. While men from town walked land that had carried his father's name for as long as anyone could remember. Then one morning he was simply gone. The text says he set off for a distant country, and the road in front of the house swallowed him, his father's face behind him, and he did not look back. He was done with looking back. His father stood somewhere on that property watching the road go empty, and the story is about to leave him there, standing in the wreckage of his own yes. For a long time, Luke spends exactly 1 sentence on the journey and lands him there. The far country, and I want to be careful here. More careful than most tellings of this story bother to be. About what the text actually says happened in that place. It says 3 things. He went far away. He squandered his wealth in wild living. Loose living. Reckless living. The Greek word paints spending without a rudder. And he ran out. That is the record. All of it. You may have heard versions of this story that build the far country into a furnace of drunkenness and prostitutes and every neon sin available. And here is something worth knowing. The detail about prostitutes does appear in Luke's chapter. But watch who says it. Because it is not the narrator. It comes much later. From an angry voice. A voice that was never in the far country and never saw 1 coin spent. Hold that detail for the back half of this story. And when you hear which mouth it comes from, it is going to tell you more about the speaker than it ever told about the son. What we can say is what the word squandered says. The money went. And it went fast. And it went nowhere. So paint the far country honestly. It did not need to be a gutter. It was probably wonderful. He is young. He is free. And he is rich. In a city where nobody knows his father. Which was the entire point of the distance. Nobody here watched him sell the olive trees. Nobody here knows what his name is supposed to mean. Here he is simply the foreigner with silver. And a man with silver in a strange city discovers something intoxicating. Money can buy the feeling of a life. It buys a table full of friends. And the friends laugh at his jokes. It buys generosity. The warm glow of being the one who pays. The one they toast. It buys welcome in every doorway. And if you have never been truly welcomed on your own account, bought welcome feels close enough to the real thing that you stop checking the difference. Look at the trade he is really making. Though, underneath the noise, everything funding this new life came from his father. The silver was his father's fields, his father's flocks, his father's decades, melted down into coins. The son wanted all of that, the whole weight of his father's giving, without the father attached. He wanted the gift and not the giver, the inheritance and not the relationship, the good things a home produces, with none of the belonging that produces them. And a fortune spent that way does not build anything. It only burns, brightly, and the brightness draws a crowd, and the crowd stays warm exactly as long as the fire is fed. There is a version of the far country that requires no travel at all. It has open branches everywhere. A man can get there through an app on the phone he holds beside his sleeping wife. A woman can get there through a bottle in a kitchen cabinet. Whole double lives run on the same one promise the far country has always made: that you can take everything good from home and spend it someplace your father's face cannot see. The address changes. The arrangement never does. And the arrangement has a mathematics. And the mathematics only runs one direction. Watch the losses come in order. Because they always come in order. First the money went. One morning the bag of silver weighed nothing. Generations of his family's work gone through his fingers in a season or two. And there was no more where that came from. Because what came from was sold. Then the choices went. Money is options. And a man with none stops deciding his life and starts accepting whatever his life will still give him. The invitations thinned. The doors that had opened by themselves stopped opening. Then the friends went. And this loss came with an education in it. Every one of those laughing table companions had been renting the seat. When the bill could no longer be paid, the seats emptied. Without drama. Without goodbyes. The way a tide goes out. He learned what he had actually purchased all those nights. Company, not friendship. An audience, not brothers. And then the last thing went. The thing he never knew he was spending. The illusion. The far country had promised to love him. And standing in it broke. Unknown. And alone. He finally saw the place with the fire out. It had never loved him. It had loved his silver. And the silver was gone. And the far country looked straight through him now. The way a city looks through a man who has nothing left to spend. He is about to discover it can still take more. Because Luke writes the next line like a trapdoor. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country. And he began to be in need. The money is gone. Now the food is going. And the far country is about to show this son of a landowner exactly what it thinks a man with empty hands is worth. Famine is an old and ordinary monster. It does not arrive to punish anyone in particular. And the text does not say, "Heaven, aim this one at the boy." Rain fails. Harvests fail. And hunger walks through a whole country at once. Indifferent as weather. Hitting the just and the unjust, and everyone in between. But famine has a talent, and its talent is sorting. When food gets scarce, a city discovers very quickly who belongs to somebody and who belongs to no one. Families close ranks around their own tables. Citizens look after citizens. And a foreigner with an empty bag learns what he actually is there, which is nobody's problem. The story says he went and glued himself to a citizen of that country. That is nearly the flavor of the Greek word. He attached himself. Fastened on. The grip of a man with no cards left to play. You can see the scene without trying. A landowner with a doorway full of hungry beggars. And this one will not leave. This young foreigner with the soft hands. Hanging on until it becomes easier to give him something than to keep refusing him. So the citizen gives him something. He gives him the job you give a man you want to disappear. Go feed my pigs. Hear that with Jewish ears. Because Jesus' audience did. The pig was not just another animal on the list. It was the unclean animal. The living emblem of everything a faithful Jew kept his distance from. No pig had ever rooted on his father's estate. Not in his lifetime. Not in his grandfather's. And of all the professions in the world, remember which one this story opened with. A shepherd, out on the hills, counting sheep. An honorable man in Jesus' telling, even if some in that world sneered at him. Now look at the far country's version of the same job. The son of the estate is herding too. Different animals. He stands in the stink in the mud at the bottom rung of a foreign economy. Staff in hand, keeping watch over creatures his own scripture calls unclean. The far country did not just take his money. It took the shape of his life and handed it back as a mockery. And it kept going. Because hunger always keeps going. Luke writes one of the rawest sentences in all of his gospel here. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating. Karopots. Hard, leathery husks off a scrub tree. The kind of forage you throw to livestock, because livestock cannot complain. He watched the animals crunch through them, and his own body leaned toward the trough. And the word Luke chooses is longing. He ached for pig feed. Read the line carefully and notice what it does not say. It does not say he ate. It says he longed to eat. And the text leaves him suspended right there, in the wanting. And honestly, that is the crueler picture. A man who eats has at least settled the matter. This man stands at the fence line of the absolute bottom, staring at garbage with appetite. And even the garbage is not offered to him, because that is the sentence that finishes the far country off. The quiet one at the end. And no one gave him anything. Let that line sit. This was the city of open doors. This was the place where he had been the man with the silver. The one who paid. The one they toasted. Where welcome poured out of every lamplit room he walked past. The far country had sold him everything. Sold him friends and nights and laughter and the feeling of a life. Now it would not give him a husk for free. Not one. It turns out the place had exactly one product the whole time. And the product was a mirror for his money. And with the money gone, the far country had nothing left to show him except what it had always been. A market. Markets do not love customers. They process them. Now stand in that pig yard and put the whole chapter around it. Because this is where the three stories snap into line and show you their design. When the sheep was lost, a shepherd was already crossing night country after it. And he would not stop until, when the coin was lost, a woman was already on her knees with a lamp. And she would not stop until the son is lost. More lost than the sheep and the coin put together. And look down every road leading into that far country. Nobody is coming. No search party from home. No father striding over the horizon with servants behind him. And it is not because the father loves less than a shepherd loves livestock. It is because this kind of lost thing cannot be fetched. A sheep can be carried home against its confusion. A coin can be swept up without being consulted. But a son is a will. Drag him home with his heart still living in the far country, and you have moved a body. Nothing more. The father could hire 100 men to bring the boy back in a cart, and the boy would still be gone. For this kind of lost, the door only opens from the inside. So heaven, if you want to put it that way, waits on a hinge in a pig yard. And in the stink and the hunger, the hinge begins to move. Luke marks the moment with 5 words. And they are the strangest 5 words in the story. Not. He repented. Not. He prayed. The text says, he came to himself. He came to himself. Turn that phrase over. Because Luke could have said a dozen simpler things and chose this one. It is the language you use for a man coming out of a fever, or surfacing from a long delirium, or snapping awake at the wheel with the road roaring under him. He came to, the way the knocked out come to. And if the boy came back to himself in that pig yard, then the sentence is quietly telling you where he had been all this time. Away. Away from his father's land. Yes, but further than that, away from himself. The strut into the far country, the burning silver, the rented friends, the whole performance of freedom, none of that had been the real him, or at least not the whole of him. Somewhere between the road out and the pig trough, he had been living beside his own life. And in the mud, with his stomach eating itself, the fever finally broke. And what does a man see when the fever breaks? Nothing mystical. Look how unglamorous this is. He does arithmetic about bread. How many hired men of my father's have bread enough and to spare? And here I am, starving to death. That is the entire vision. No angel visits the pig yard. No scroll unrolls in the sky. He just remembers, with the terrible clarity of the starving, that the day laborers on his father's estate, the men at the very bottom of that world, hired by the morning and paid by the sundown, those men have more bread than they can finish. The kitchen smell of his childhood comes back to him, standing in pig stink, and it undoes him. So he builds a plan. And the plan is a speech. And you can hear him drafting it because Luke lets us Lerona. I will set out and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. Look at the architecture of that speech, because he has thought it through. Part 1, confession, and a real one. No excuses attached. Sinned against heaven and against you. Full stop. Part 2, verdict. He sentences himself before his father can. Not worthy to be called your son. The sonship is gone, and he says so first. Part 3, the proposal. And the proposal is the saddest part. Make me a hired hand. Pay me a wage. Let me earn my keep in the fields I used to own. Sleep where the day men sleep. And work off what I burned, year by year, like a debt. He is not dreaming of restoration. He cannot even imagine restoration. The best future his imagination can build is employment. A room near the family, instead of a place in it. Now, was the speech sincere? Here is where honesty about this story matters more than sentiment. You cannot fully audit this man's heart. And Luke does not invite you to. The speech was drafted by a starving man within smelling distance of a pig trough. And hunger is an eloquent ghostwriter. Maybe the sorrow ran all the way down. Maybe half of it was his stomach talking. And the theology came along to dress the hunger up. The text shows us the words and hides the motive. And I think the hiding is the point. Because this story is about to make something outrageously clear. And it needs you to see it. What happens next does not happen because his repentance was pure enough. Nothing that is coming will be a payment for the quality of his speech. Strip it down. Then, a ruined man in a pig yard, rehearsing a job application to his own father. Motives mixed. Dignity gone. Nothing to offer but the wreckage and the walk. That is everything he has. And then comes the line. And the line is 2 words. And everything in this story swings on them. He got up. That is it. That is the hinge of the whole chapter. Maybe the hinge of the whole Gospel of Luke. He was sitting in the mud of the far country. And then he was standing. And then he was walking. One direction. Home. The distance between lost and found. For this kind of lost thing is the height of a man standing up. And so he goes. And the far country lets him. The way a fire lets go of what it has finished burning. Mile after mile he walks the road back. and you know what he is doing the entire way, because it is what everyone does on that road. He is rehearsing. Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. Lips moving over the words at every milestone, sanding them, timing them, bracing behind them. He is getting ready for the face his father will make. He has imagined that face 100 ways by now. The cold one, the wounded one, the one that looks straight through him, the doorway shutting, the long probation among the hired men. He has prepared himself for every version of this homecoming that a guilty imagination can build. Every version except one. The one thing he never rehearsed for is the thing that is about to come running down the road. The story goes home before he does. It jumps ahead of the walking man, back to the estate, and gives us one line that people have been reading through tears for 2,000 years. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. Stop on those words. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him. You can measure a man's heart by what his eyes do when he thinks nobody needs him. A figure appears at the far edge of the road, a smudge of a man, too distant to name, and the father names him instantly. Out of every traveler who ever topped that rise, this one he knows at a glance, at a distance where a face is nothing, and all you have is outline and gait. The particular way. One boy, out of all the boys on earth, carries his shoulders. The text never tells us how long the father had been watching that road. It does not say he stood at the gate every evening. And we should not write scenes Luke did not write. It tells us one thing only. And the one thing is enough. When the sun finally appeared, the father did not need a second look. Now the boy on the road. Picture what he sees from his end. Because he has been dreading this exact geography. The land starts to turn familiar. That hill, that well, landmarks from his childhood rising around him like witnesses. And every step now is a step deeper into his shame. Past fields that used to be his father's and are not anymore. Because he sold them. Toward a village full of people who watched him do it. His speech is worn smooth from rehearsal. Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. He is walking himself into the version of this day he has prepared for. The cold reception, the long groveling, the servants watching sideways, and then the far figure by the house begins to move. And the movement is wrong. It is not the stiff walk of an old man coming out to hear a case. The figure is gathering speed. His father is running. Luke stacks the verbs so fast they trip over each other. His father saw him, and was filled with compassion, and ran, and threw his arms around him, and kissed him. 5 things in one breath. And the engine of all 5 is that word in the middle. Compassion. A Greek word that lives in the gut. The kind of feeling that hits you below the ribs and moves your body before your mind has voted. Here is what that running would have cost. And Jesus' audience felt it, even if we no longer do. A landowner in that world. An elder. The head of an estate. Was a man of gravity in the most literal sense. He moved slowly because his dignity moved with him. Everyone came to him. And a man of that standing wore a long robe to the ankle. Which means that in order to run, really run, he had to do something almost comic. He had to reach down, gather the hem in his fists, hike the robe up past his knees, and sprint through the village on an old man's bare legs with his clothing bunched in his hands. To many of the people hearing this story for the first time, that picture would have landed somewhere between startling and scandalous. Patriarchs do not run. Running is for boys and messengers. This man is the most respected figure in the district, and he is flying down the main road with his knees showing. And he does not care, because his son is at the end of it, and many students of this story, reading it against the honor codes of that world, point out something that turns the running from touching into fierce. Reading the text leaves room for, even if it never spells it out. Think about what is standing between the boy and the front door. The village. The same village that watched him demand his inheritance from a living father. The same neighbors who saw the family holdings sold out of his hands and watched him leave with the silver. Communities like that had ways of making a returning disgrace feel every ounce of what he had done. In cold shoulders. In courses. Maybe worse from the bolder ones. That boy was going to have to walk through his reputation before he ever reached the house. Unless somebody got to him first. Unless the most honored man in the village wrapped the boy in his own arms before anyone else could reach him, and made the whole street watch him do it. Read it that way, and the father's sprint is not just eagerness. It is interception. He puts his own body between his son and every cold eye in that village. And he spends his dignity like money to do it. And now anyone who wants to shame the boy has to go through the old man's embrace to get there, so they collide in the road. And the father grabs him, this filthy, starved, pig-scented son, and kisses him. The word suggests he kissed him again and again. The way you kiss something you were certain was in a grave. And notice the order of events. Because the order is everything. The son has not said one word yet. The speech, the confession, the carefully sanded apology. None of it has left his mouth. The father did not wait to hear the terms. He ran at a silence. Whatever the boy was coming home to say, the embrace got there first. Which means the embrace was never a response to the speech. It was waiting in the father the whole time. All those months. Like held breath. The son spent every mile of that road rehearsing how to crawl home. The father closed the last stretch of it at a dead run. There is your answer taking shape. The one this journey is named for. How far will he go? The shepherd's price was effort. A night of rock and risk. The woman's price was upheaval. A house turned inside out. The father's price is dignity itself. An old man sprinting bare-legged through his own village to reach the child who broke him. The cost is climbing, and it has one more flight to go. Somewhere inside that embrace, the boy starts talking. He gets the words out, with his face pressed against his father's shoulder. The words he has been carrying since the pig yard. And they come out just as drafted. Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Part 1. Delivered. Part 2. Delivered. And Part 3. The proposal. The whole point of the speech. The plan to sign on as a hired hand and work the debt like a sentence. Part 3 never makes it out of his mouth, because the father is no longer listening to him. The father has turned his head, and he is shouting past his son. At the house. At the servants already running out into the road. Quick! Bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let us eat and celebrate. The boy came with a job application. The father is shouting orders for a coronation. Look at what the servants come running with. And do not turn the items into a puzzle box. Because together they are saying one thing at the top of their voice. The best robe in a house like that was the garment you brought out for the guest you meant to honor above all others. And it goes over the boy's rags and pig stink without so much as a bath first. A ring, in that world, could carry the family's mark. Its standing, the right to act in the family's name. And whatever this one carried, the father slides it onto the same hand that took the inheritance and burned it. And sandals, the smallest item and the loudest. Bare feet were for the men who served the house. Shoes were for the family it belonged to. The boy walked that whole road planning to ask for a barefoot job. And his father put shoes on him before he could finish asking. Every item lands on the same nail. The son sentenced himself to worker. The father overrules the sentence and reinstates him as son. publicly, visibly, in front of everyone, before the boy has proven one single thing, before a day of labor, before a coin of the debt is repaid. And let us be honest here, with the same honesty this story has earned from us so far, about what that grace does and does not do. It does not unsell the fields. The olive trees his grandfather planted still belong to strangers tonight. It does not unlive the far country, or refill the bag of silver, or give the father back the months of watching an empty road. The damage is real, and it stays real. Forgiveness is not a claim that nothing happened. It is a decision about what happens next. And this father makes the decision in the middle of the road, with the wreckage still smoking. He does not wait for the books to balance before he calls the boy his son. He was never running a ledger in the first place. Ledgers are for hired men. And the whole tragedy of the boy's speech was that he thought he was applying to one. Then the father gives the reason for all of it. And the reason is the sentence this whole chapter of Luke has been building toward. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. Lost and found. There is the language of the sheep. There is the language of the coin. The father reaches for the exact words of the first two stories and hangs them on his boy. And the pattern locks. And then, right on schedule, comes the celebration. Because in this chapter, finding always ends in a feast. The shepherd called his friends. The woman called her neighbors. The father calls for the fattened calf. The animal a family kept for the wedding. For the once-in-a-decade feast. And by evening, the whole estate is roaring. Music, dancing, the smell of roasted meat drifting down the street. Neighbors crowding the courtyard. And think about who those neighbors are. People who had watched this boy strip the estate and vanish are eating in his honor tonight. Because the father's welcome rewrote the rules for everyone. And the man who owns the feast keeps saying it. To anyone in reach. My son was dead. He is alive. So count with me. One last time. The way we have been counting since the beginning. The sheep, carried home on the shepherd's shoulders. That was one. The coin, shining in the woman's hand. That was two. And now, the son, sitting at his father's table in his father's robe with the ring on his hand. Music shaking the walls around him. That is three. 3 lost things. And all 3 found. The title of this journey promised you 3. And the promise is kept. And every story so far has ended in the same place. At a party. If Jesus had stopped talking right here, this would already be the most beautiful story he ever told. And the crowd on that dusty road could have gone home, wiping their eyes. He did not stop here, because it is getting dark outside the feast, and out past the music. At the far edge of the property, a man is walking in from the fields with the day's dirt on his hands. He has put in a full day of work. Like every day, he is tired, and he is hungry, and he is heading home to a house that is, for reasons nobody has told him yet, blazing with light. He hears it before he sees it. Music, floating out across the fields in the dark, and under the music the thump of dancing feet, and voices, many voices, coming from his own house. The older son stops on the path, and you should stop with him, because you have met this man before. You met him in the first minute of this video, standing 10 paces from a lit doorway, close enough to hear every drumbeat, refusing to walk inside. You probably assumed, back then, that you were looking at the prodigal, some runaway son gathering his courage at the edge of his father's property, afraid to knock. It was a fair assumption. It was also wrong. The man standing outside the music never ran away at all. He has been here the entire time. He was here the morning his brother demanded the inheritance. Here through every planting and every harvest since. Here, through his father's long silences and the empty place at the table. He is the son who stayed. And this party is the first he has heard of any of it. Because nobody sent word to the fields. He has put in a full day of work on the estate. His estate now. Remember, the division was made years ago. And he is walking home sweaty and hungry to find his own house in the middle of the biggest celebration it has ever thrown. And no one thought to tell him why. So look at what he does. Because Luke chooses this detail with care. He does not walk in. His own home. His own courtyard. Food from his own herds on the tables. And instead of stepping through the door, he stops outside it and calls over one of the servant boys. And asks him, "What is going on in there?" Read that move twice. A son asks a servant for the news of his own house. Whatever has been growing in this man, it shows itself right there. In that small, strange act of standing in the yard, interviewing the help, gathering intelligence about his father's joy from the outside. Like a stranger, like an auditor, the boy tells him straight, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has him back safe and sound." And the older son's body answers before his mouth does. Luke says he became angry and refused to go in. The anger locks his knees. The feet stop. Right there in the dark. 10 paces from the door. And now you know exactly where you are. This is the scene we opened with. The man in the shadows. The music pouring past him. The numb feet. The open door he will not walk through. That was never the runaway. That was the brother who never left. And here is where the count we have been keeping all journey long turns over in your hand. The title of this video promised you 3 lost things. And you got them. Sheep. Coin. Son. Found. 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 But Jesus, telling this to a road full of murmuring religious men, kept going. Because his count was different. He counted 4. Look at the collection this chapter has been assembling. The sheep was lost by drift. 1 innocent mouthful at a time. No decision anywhere in it. The coin was lost by other hands. Dropped. Through no fault of its own. Silent under the dust. The younger son was lost by choice. Eyes open. Walking out the front door with the money in his fist. 3 ways to be lost. Each one deeper than the last. And now the story lays down its final card. The 4th way. Lost at home. Lost inside the boundary lines. 10 steps from the table. In the yard of a house you never once left. The older brother is lost in the only place nobody ever thinks to search. And the proof is simple. The feast is his family. His food. His father. And he is standing in the dark, refusing it. And the distance between him and that doorway is the only distance in all of Luke chapter 15 that never gets crossed. The younger boy needed a famine and a pig yard to hit the far country's bottom. The older one is standing in his own farmyard. And he has been living in the far country for years. And tonight is the first night it shows. Word reaches the father inside. Your other son is here. And he will not come in. And the father does the thing that should sound familiar by now. The thing this man apparently cannot stop doing. He leaves the celebration. The host. The man of the hour. The one person a feast cannot spare. Gets up from his own table. Walks out of the light and the music. And goes out into the dark after this son too. For the 2nd time in one day. The father goes out to bring a lost boy home. The father comes out into the yard, and the text says he pleaded with him. Take that word seriously. The patriarch, the man with every right in that world to simply command, stands in the dark, begging his own boy to come eat. And the older son opens his mouth. And out comes a lifetime. Look, all these years I have been slaving for you. And I never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. Before we touch what is wrong in that speech, be fair about what is right in it. Because if you make this man a cartoon, the story loses its teeth. Nearly every hard fact he states is true. He did stay. He did work, year after year, through heat and harvest, while his brother spent the family's silver in a foreign city. He never got a feast. There is no verse anywhere in this story where the father throws a party for the faithful son. And that absence is real. And it stings. And run the property math one more time. The math we filed away back when the estate was divided. It was divided between them. Years ago. Everything left after the younger boy cashed out was bound up with the older brother's share. Which means the fattened calf roasting in there tonight. The robe. The wine. The bread. Every mouthful of that celebration is being carved out of what had been assigned to the faithful son, spent in honor of the person who already burned his own. Nobody asked him. He found out from a servant boy in the dark, and he watched something tonight that would test anybody who ever did things right. He watched the one who caused all the damage get welcomed home ahead of any apology he ever heard, ahead of any repayment, robed and ringed and celebrated at cost to the faithful, while the faithful walked in from the fields unthanked. If your chest tightens a little on his behalf, good. It is supposed to. His case is strong. Now listen to how he makes it. Because the man's own sentences are testifying about him, and they tell a sadder story than his grievance does. He starts with a word count of years. All these years I have been slaving for you. Slaving, out of every word available to describe a son's life on his father's land. He reaches for the vocabulary of servitude. Wages. Obligation. I never disobeyed your orders. Orders. This is not how a son describes a home. It is how an employee describes a contract. And it means that somewhere across those faithful years, quietly, invisibly, the older brother stopped living in that house as a son and started living in it as staff. He never packed a bag. And he moved out anyway. His body stayed on the estate while his heart punched a clock. And he has been keeping the books ever since, logging every obedient year like hours worked, waiting for a payday that never came. Because his father never knew there was a bill. Then the goat. You never even gave me a young goat. Hear the ledger snap open. A goat against a fattened calf. Line against line. His account against his brother's. And the accounts do not balance. And the imbalance is the injustice as he sees it. He has done the one thing you can never do inside a family and stay whole. He has priced it. Then the coldest phrase in the whole chapter. This son of yours. He cannot say the words, my brother. The man came home from the dead tonight, and the older son hands him back to the father like a package addressed to someone else. This son of yours. A pointed finger where an embrace should be. And with that one phrase he resigns from the relationship. He is renouncing the brotherhood while standing in its yard. And then, the detail this story planted a long way back and told you to hold. Squandered your property with prostitutes. Stop. Where did that come from? Go back through everything Luke told us about the far country. Reckless living. Yes. Money gone. Yes. Prostitutes appear nowhere in the narrator's account. Not one word. The older brother was never there. He saw nothing, heard nothing firsthand, has no report to work from. That detail is not evidence. It is imagination. It is the picture the older brother has been painting in his own head across all those faithful years in the fields. And tonight, in anger, the gallery finally opened. Ask yourself what it means that the brother who stayed home has spent years mentally furnishing the far country with its most lurid possibilities. In detail. With a specificity the actual story never provides. Bitterness does that. Bitterness is an artist. It sits in the field, doing its duty. And all the while it is sketching the sins of the people who got away. And the sketches get more vivid every year. Because the bitterness needs them vivid. The accusation tells us nothing about where the younger son spent his money. It tells us everything about where the older son spent his mind. So stand back and look at him. This good, wronged, faithful, furious man. And see the fourth lost thing in full. He never tasted the far country. And it lives in him. He never left the father. And he talks to him like a boss. He never wasted the inheritance. And he cannot enjoy one bite of it. He kept every rule and lost the entire point, which was never the rules. It was the father. It was always just the father. There is a person, some of you know. And for some of you, the person is closer than that. Sits in the same pew every Sunday. Third row maybe. Serves on the committee. Gives faithfully. Shows up when it snows. And one morning somebody walks through those doors trailing a past everybody knows about. The affair. The arrests. The wrecked family. And the church stands up and celebrates them home. Hugs. Tears. Joy. All over the room. And in one faithful chest. 3 rows back. Something rises that is nothing like joy. It sits there through the whole service. Hot and heavy and unsayable. If that has ever been your chest, then you already understand the man in this yard better than any scholar does. And you know why he is not a villain. Out of all 4 lost things, in Luke chapter 15, he is the easiest one to become. You can drift into the far country. You can be dropped into a dark corner. But this one you can catch while doing everything right. Which is exactly how he caught it. The music is still playing behind the father. The son has said his piece. And the yard goes quiet. And the old man who ran down the road at noon now has one more distance to cross. 10 pace. And only words to cross it with. Notice what the father does not say first. The son has just accused him to his face. Priced out years of obedience, like an unpaid invoice. Disowned his own brother in a single phrase. And painted the far country in colors he invented himself. Any father in that world had grounds to end the conversation right there. This is the second son to shame him publicly in one story. And the first one, at least, had the decency to do it privately. Indoors. This one is doing it in the yard. With a courtyard full of guests in earshot. Refusing his father's feast in front of everyone. That refusal was its own scandal. The eldest son had duties at a family celebration. And every neighbor inside those walls knew he was missing. And knew what his absence said. The father answers none of it with force. He answers with a word. And the word is the first repair. My son. Actually something closer to my child. The tender form. The word you use for someone small. The older brother opened his speech with no title at all. Remember. No father. No, sir. Just look. All these years, I have been slaving. He stripped the relationship out of his very grammar. And the father's first move is to put it back. Child, you came at me like an employee. And I am answering you as a father. Because that is the only language I have ever spoken to you. Then he says the sentence that should have ended every ledger the son ever kept. You are always with me. And everything I have is yours. Take that in slowly. Because the older brother apparently never had. Everything I have is yours. This is not news being announced tonight. It has been the standing arrangement for years. Ever since the day the property was divided between them. The goat he never got. He could have had. The herds. The fields. The house, throwing light across this yard. All of it stood assigned to him. He had been slaving for wages in the middle of his own inheritance. Keeping accounts in a house where everything already carried his name. starving on principle at a table that belonged to him. Nothing was being withheld. The feast he never threw with his friends was never forbidden. It was just never asked for. Because a man who thinks he is staff does not throw parties in the big house. The father is not correcting the son's math. He is showing him there was never a bill to settle. In either direction, you cannot earn what is already yours. You can only fail to enjoy it. And you are always with me. Hear the akik inside that half of the sentence. It means the father never stopped counting him either. All the attention that ran down the road after the runaway never subtracted 1 hour from the son who stayed. But it also means something quieter and sadder. All those years of proximity, side by side, and the boy standing in front of him managed to be with him the entire time without being with him at all. Then the father does his second repair. And it is one word again, aimed at the coldest phrase of the night. The son said, "This son of yours." The father hands it back rebuilt. It was right that we celebrate and be glad. Because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. This brother of yours. He picks up the sentence his son used to sever the family and splices the line back together in front of him. You can refuse the party. The father is saying, but I will not let you rewrite the family tree while you do it. The man at my table is my son. And whatever you decide tonight, he is your brother. You do not get to hand him to me like a stranger's mail. And in the middle of that sentence sits a small word doing enormous work. We had to celebrate. Had to. In the Greek, it carries necessity. The way you say the sun had to rise. Run the whole chapter back and listen to how the joy has been building toward that word. The shepherd came home and said, "Rejoice with me." On invitation. That was one. The woman found her silver and said, "Rejoice with me." On invitation. That was two. And the father, standing in the dark with his angry boy, does not extend invitation number 3. He states a law of the house. We had to. In this family, when the dead come back to life, celebration is not a preference someone approves. It is a necessity. Like breath, joy, in the father's house, is not optional the way the older son is treating it. It is the native climate of the place. And the son's refusal to feel it is precisely the measurement of how far from home he is standing while standing at home. Now pull back and look at the man in full. This father, because the story has been quietly assembling his portrait all night, and it is finished now. At noon he saw a ruined boy on the horizon and ran to him. Spent his dignity in the road. Gathered his robe in his fists and let the village watch his bare legs fly. At evening, he heard about a furious boy in the yard, and he got up from the head of his own table, walked out of his own feast, past his own guests, and went to him, twice in one day. One son broke his heart by leaving, and he went out to meet him. The other broke it by staying, and he went out to meet him too. Different directions, same father, and his answer to both was his own 2 feet crossing the distance. That is the finding this whole journey has been climbing toward. And it is time to say it plainly. The shepherd paid in effort, a night of rock and dark, and he carried what he found. The woman paid in disruption. A house stood on its head, and she lifted what she found out of the dust. The father paid in honor, twice, sprinting past his dignity at noon and abandoning his own celebration at night. And what he went out for could not be carried or picked up, only pleaded with. So how far will he go? Here is the answer of Luke chapter 15. Whole, as far as the wilderness, for the one who wandered off, as far as the darkest corner of the house, for the one who got dropped, as far as the end of the road, at a dead run, for the one who left on purpose, and as far as 10 cold paces across his own yard, for the one who never left and never arrived. He goes to wherever the lost thing is. And notice what is true even of the boy who stood up in the pig yard and walked home on his own 2 feet. He chose to return. And the choice was real. And it mattered. What he could not do was finish it. He came home planning to negotiate his way back in. And he was met, and embraced, and restored before the negotiation ever opened. Nobody in this chapter completes the journey alone. The last stretch, every time, in every direction, is crossed by the one who comes out. Home does not wait with its arms folded. Home runs. The father has made his case. The music is still going behind him. A little thinner now. The way music sounds when a room is waiting. The 2 of them stand in the yard. The old man and his firstborn. And everything that can be said has been said. Everything I have is yours. Your brother was dead and is alive. Come in, and then the story does the strangest thing any story has ever done. It stops. Look for the next verse. The one where the older brother wipes his eyes and goes inside, or shakes his head and walks off into the dark. It does not exist. The parable ends in the yard. Mid-scene, with the father's plea hanging in the night air and the son's answer nowhere on the page. Luke preserves the tension exactly as it stands. Unfinished. A feast with the door wide open and a man still outside it. And then the gospel simply moves on to other things. And 2,000 years of readers have reached the bottom of that page and looked for one more sentence that is not there. That is not a missing ending. A storyteller like Jesus does not lose track of his last line. The ending is missing on purpose. And to see the purpose, you only have to remember who was standing in front of him when he told it. Go back to the dusty road where all of this started. 2 rings of people. The inner ring, tax collectors and sinners, pressed in close. And the outer ring, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, murmuring at a careful distance about the company this man keeps. He welcomes sinners and eats with them. Now run the story against the crowd, one final time. The tax collectors heard themselves easily enough. They were the sheep. The coin. The boy with the pig smell still on him. The ones this teacher kept insisting heaven throws parties over. But the men in the outer ring, the serious men, the faithful men, the ones who had kept every rule and stayed home their whole lives. They had a character in this story too, and he showed up last. A brother, standing outside a celebration he refuses to enter, angry at a table full of exactly the wrong people, arguing that grace this cheap is unfair to everyone who behaved. The complaint in the older brother's mouth is their complaint. It is the murmur from the road, dressed in a story, handed back to them. You are the man. Nathan's old trap, sprung one more time, and sprung with love. And that is why the last line is missing. Jesus walks the story right up to the older brother's decision, and then hands the pen to the men standing in front of him. Because the decision was theirs, not his. The story could not end, because the people it was aimed at had not answered yet. He would not write their ending for them. He would not slam the door on the murmuring men, any more than the father slammed it on the furious son. He just left it open, which is the most dangerous thing you can do with a door, and the most hopeful. So the chapter closes with all 4 lost things accounted for, and the count is worth taking one last time. Slowly, the sheep came home on the shepherd's shoulders. The coin came up shining out of the dust. The younger son came home in rags and sat down in a robe. 3 lost, 3 found, 3 feasts, and the 4th stands in the yard as the page runs out. 10 paces from the table, the shortest distance in the whole chapter and the only one never crossed, with the father still out there beside him, still asking, which means the question this chapter leaves you holding was never only the obvious one. Everyone asks whether the lost can come home. Luke, chapter 15, spends its last scene asking something harder, whether the found will open the door when they do. Because home, in this story, was never just the place where you get welcomed. It is the place where you learn to welcome. And a man can live inside its walls for decades and never learn. And a runaway can be robed and ringed while the rule keeper eats his heart out in the dark. The father's arms were never the hard part of this chapter. The hard part is the feast, the table, the seat beside the person you resent, the music you have to decide to walk into. So before this ends, find yourself in the story. Because after everything we have walked through, there are really only two places left to stand. Some of you are on the road. You know exactly which far country is yours. And somewhere in your chest, there is a speech half-drafted that begins with, "I am no longer worthy." This story spent all its miles saying one thing to you. Nobody is waiting to hear you finish that speech. The whole journey home, from the pig yard forward, was 2 words long. He got up. The running is not your job. And some of you are in the yard. You did everything right. And it cost you. And nobody killed a calf for it. And there is a person at that table you cannot look at. Then hear the part of the story that was aimed 10 paces from the door. The father is not inside waiting for you to get over it. He left the feast. He is standing next to you in the cold. And everything he has is yours. And has been the whole time. Luke never tells us whether the older brother went in. Maybe that is because the last line of this story was never his to write alone. It belongs to everyone who has ever stood in the dark outside a celebration, close enough to hear the music, deciding, the door is still open. The father is still in the yard. He always comes out.